Hello, good morning, and welcome to a special edition of Sunrise Daily, our Independence Day edition. I'm Chamberlain Uso.
It's great to have you with us. I'm Kayode Okikiolu.
I wish I was wearing green jacket this morning.
It's not too late. You can go back home and change.
Amakide, good morning.
Well, the session is going to be a little longer than normal, slightly, so maybe that's why I thought you have a little time. But yes, indeed, the president just addressed the country in that special Independence Day broadcast, and he highlighted some key things of what he expects of us and what the administration is doing. And then some mention of the dreams of our founding fathers, which we'll hope to touch as we progress in the course of the program in here today. But then earlier today, the president, while he was addressing the country, spoke about change. And he did say change doesn't just happen, as he has said previously, saying that we must change our lawless habits, our attitude to public office and public trust. Simply put, to bring about change, we must change ourselves by being law-abiding citizens. That is, it's something that, okay, you know, this will always have different perspectives and different responses from people.
Mm-hmm. Well, the good part of it is that at least I expect that this is not something new on any one of us. It's something we all know that we're supposed to do. There's a chapter of the Constitution that outlines the duties of Nigerian citizens, which is hardly ever publicized anyway. So those duties are part of the things that I believe that the president is referencing here. Maybe we should actually, give it a little more attention. A lot of spaces, the Constitution, 230-something pages of the Constitution, has a lot of what government needs to do. Very, very few of what the people need to do. So maybe this is just one of those things.
We need to obey the laws.
It's kind of interesting also that this is like refurbishing that change begins with you campaign. Remember that.
Yeah.
So this is another way of saying change begins with you, essentially. And it's also important that the president is saying, yes, a lot of attention is on the government, but then, hey, there's also you, the citizens. So yes, change begins with you in another way. I think that's what the president tried to convey this morning.
But then, expectedly, he also spoke about security, saying, look, in the last 4 years, we've combated the terrorist scourge of Boko Haram. So there's a highlight so much. Of course, it's one of the tripod of the administration's campaign, saying that the capacity of our armed forces, they've combated the scourge of Boko Haram, for instance, and then that capacity of our armed forces to defend our territorial integrity continues to be enhanced by the acquisition of military hardware. The police affairs is being resuscitated. Initiatives are being complemented by ongoing recruitment of 10,000 constables, and then cybercrime, which recent developments.
Generally when we talk about security, we pay a lot of attention to the physical security, territorial integrity, man-to-man relationship.
Which is important as well.
And of course, most certainly important, that a lot of attention has been given to Boko Haram before this government came into power in 2015, and even subsequently over the past 4 years, as the president said in his speech. And a lot of that, of course, we've talked about security over and over again on this program, and the shape-shifting nature of it, how that it continues to evolve from one shape to another shape, armed conflict, banditry, farmer-herder clash, all kinds of things, continues to shift its shape from one to the other over time. But little attention has been paid to cybercrime. And one of why this is also important, is that it is an integral part of Nigeria's national security strategy. That's evolved since year 2000 from the Obasanjo government into the Jonathan administration into this government as well. And cybercrime hasn't been given, as much attention as it ought. That is, and which is part of which this whole talk about fake news and all of that is also coming on board. For decades.
Yeah.
For decades. But giving attention to these things is also very, very important. We have a cybercrime law. How many people even know there is a cybercrime law?
And there's something, instructive the president said. Perhaps this is something that has been said a couple of times, but then he reiterated, and he talked about this issue of abuse of technology. abuse of social media, and it's been very controversial. But then he also said that, when the purported exercise of these rights infringes on the rights of other citizens or threatens to undermine our national security, we'll take firm and decisive action. You remember there's been that talk about, how far does your right go before it infringes on other people's right? And then social media users saying, well, there's right to expression. Well, the president this morning is saying that it is important that people watch what they say.
Yeah, but at the same time, is how do we begin to even stem the tide? Maybe it goes back to change begins with you.
Which of the tide?
The stem the tide of infringing on what we call cyberbullying.
Simply that they should just take a look at the laws. I mean, we won't be the first to do something about all of those. Societies are doing something about all of those. So how are we comparing with what they have done? Of course, it has to be with specificity, peculiarity to their own environment. So that's why the laws too need to catch up with some of these changes and developments as they are happening with time. But it wasn't just security that he highlighted. He also spoke about the economy. Well, that is huge. There are many who think, look, if all is not well with the economy, you know that there will be problems. Accelerating sustainable and inclusive economic growth. So, some highlights as well. The administration inherited a skewed economy, he says, where the oil sector comprised of only 8% of the GDP, but contributed 70% of government revenue and 90% of foreign exchange earnings over the past years. So, well, guys, when he says, look, past periods of relatively high economic growth were driven by reliance on oil sector, and then that talk about diversifying the economy. What do we do about agriculture? Are we achieving as much results and targets as we ought to? Will always be a major talking point. Maybe if you want to add to that, the recent border closure and the activities of smugglers there, how that is also impacting on things.
I noticed from the speech that, the president devoted about 7 paragraphs to security, but economy took a large chunk of this speech, about 2 paragraphs. Just to the economy, and it just speaks to the fact that, yes, as much as you're looking at security, you also need a good economy to combat security challenges. And, he highlighted, for example, the ERGP, which is some sort of, plan for improving Nigeria's economy. And he talked about, what the government is doing, what the government has done, and what the government will do, especially the release of about 600 billion naira for infrastructure in the coming months. So, economy is a big deal, especially because it affects security and also the other, aim and objective of this administration, the fight against corruption. So economy, as it were, took a large chunk of the discussion this morning.
And it's, just as Chamberlain mentioned the other time, there's hardly going to be a time when the president will talk about anything without talking about the tripod upon which the administration stands. That's security, securing the nation, economy, and fighting corruption. And of course, those are the 3 major, high points of the entire conversation. But you see, the thing about the economy, he also asked for partnership with the states, because just as somebody, highlighted, I think it was Senator Rochas Okorocha that mentioned, look, why does the federal government have a federal ministry of agriculture when the federal government does not have power over any land? That may be a little controversial, but then perhaps, it's something that, will also be looked at. So if Nigeria is going to play a leading role in the Department of Agriculture in our scheme of things, then it's really something that government really should pay a lot of attention to, because it is unarguably the highest employer of labor in Nigeria. And if we do not pay attention to it as we ought, I don't even know how to begin to say the consequences that we could be fighting.
Well, yes, indeed. So we do have some eminent personalities who are going to at least give us their perspective on, yes, it's our Independence Day from 1960 up until date. How has the country addressed the dreams of the objectives of our founding fathers? And then perhaps, of course, we'll also start with the president's speech. But let's go right ahead and introduce our guest this morning, gentlemen. We do have Alhaji Tanko Yakasai, OFR. He joins us from our studios in Abuja. Good morning, sir, and thank you for joining us this morning. And then we also do have Chief Edwin Clark, who is an elder statesman, also joining us from Abuja. Good morning, sir, and thank you for joining us as well today. All right, let me go ahead and start with Alhaji Yakasai. Yes, we've just heard we've heard the president address the country on this particular day, highlighting so much on that. But from what you gleaned from the president's speech, what is your impression of that speech?
Well, first and foremost, I think we should congratulate ourselves in reaching 59 years since our independence. By and large, we have been confronted with various challenges, including the civil war and other infractions in the society. But all the same, in spite of them, we are able to move on, make some progress. The interesting thing that I noticed in the president's address is departure from the previous practice of concentration, attention on criticizing his predecessors, which doesn't add any value to what we are doing. So I hope that that will be the beginning of the change to next level that the government promised to pursue. We, I think, need to know more about what the government is trying to do to deal with the problem of poverty, because our major source of problem is poverty that occasions unemployment and all other vices. Until we can tackle this problem head on and successfully, we will continue to be bedevilled with the problems of infractions and stealing, armed robbery, and other things. So I hope that, I don't know what the government is doing, but I hope the government will turn its attention to long-term planning. I always mention that we need to have a definitive national development program whereby the government will highlight the areas of development that will change the narrative in Nigeria for the better. If we do that, we'll be able to make sure that those who are not able to have 3 square meals a day will begin to have at least 2, and then or 1 or 2, and then 3. This is the main thing, because the poverty which occasions unemployment is still very, very present in our society. Millions of Nigerian educated youth are roaming about our streets without job. Job creation is the main strategy that can tackle the problem of poverty. And there are 2 major areas that can be tackled to deal with these problems. One is agriculture, because bulk of about 70–80% of our population are engaged in agriculture. If we don't change the narrative in the way we operate our agriculture, the issue of employment opportunity or providing employment opportunity for our teeming population, particularly the educated young, will be a mere mirage. The second is the question of industrialization.
Okay.
You cannot industrialize if you don't have power. Power is the main bedrock of developing industry, and the industry that will make quick change in a society are small scale and medium type of industries that can easily absorb the millions of youth that we have that are roaming our streets. I hope that the government will come out with a strategy whereby we can see clearly a trajectory for transforming our industries into a modern industry, not agriculture in the first place, into a modern agriculture, and then getting power sufficient enough to generate our industrialization program. When we do that, certainly it will be quick for us to get out of our woods. But I hope that those who are responsible for handling these issues, I don't know what they are doing, but I hope they will take what I said into consideration together with other people.
All right, let us bring in Chief Clark this morning as well. Good morning, Chief. And could you tell us, how does this speech resonate with you, put differently?
Good morning. Pardon?
How does the President's Independence Day address to the country?
Well, it's the usual speech
Yes.
on Independence Day. When I listen to it, first of all, we have every reason to thank ourselves that we are now 59. Despite all the challenges and fighting the civil war, we are okay. The president, there's nothing new in Mr. President's speech. We have heard all this before. The increase of power, fighting corruption, corruption fighting back. We've had all this before. And I think what we want most in this country today, I expected that Mr. President would address more about the challenges of insecurity in the country. Today, the insecurity in this country is preventing us from to move forward. And for 4 years now, we still have all the challenges we had in the previous administration. Boko Haram, for instance, has not been decimated. It's still around in the northeast. Today, we have various other challenges, like kidnapping, which he mentioned in his address, raping of women, harassment problems, and so forth. These have all been mentioned. These are things happening, and Mr. President mentioned them. But we thought the speech will contain new strategies for fighting the problems we have in this country, unemployment, in our educational system, where we have over 12 million children out of school. The hunger in this country, how are we going to tackle it? We've heard so much about the development of the diversification of our resources, instead of depending upon oil alone, which he also mentioned in his address. But those of us who come from the Niger Delta, we have been neglected. The pollution is going on. I'm happy he also mentioned the Ogoni cleanup. Ogoni is not the only place which is being polluted in the Niger Delta. People are there are nothing, no development in Niger Delta. We see so many things happening, but we remain patient in the interest of the peaceful coexistence of this country. And he did not tell us about Nancy Boko Haram is the Fulani armed herdsmen that is moving, ravaging the whole country. Today, not a single Fulani herdsmen have been captured. They're moving around everywhere, both in the north, both in the south. And the problem of insecurity we have in northwest, from Sokoto to Katsina, and things are not okay. India used to be the headquarters of the capital of poverty in the world. India has transferred it to us. We are the largest country in Africa, and we are not happy about it. So we do hope in the new dispensation, now that we have independence for 59 years, Mr. President, within the next 3 or 4 years, Nigeria will be able to solve some of the challenges we have today. The number of children out of school, the unemployment, children leave school, they stay with their parents for another 5 years, no job. They do their youth services and wait for 10 years, no job. I think these are things that should be tackled by the president. We must put politics aside. As for the security of this country, the federal government cannot do it alone. That is why many of us are suggesting that, number one, we should have a security roundtable talk. The problem in Nigeria today is not in the north alone. It's a national problem which requires everybody to sit down to talk about them. So there's need for a security conference in this country. And those of us who have been advocating for restructuring of this country, without restructuring, no meaningful progress will be achieved in this country.
All right, Chief Clark, we'll take it from there when we come back in a moment. Please stay with us.
Technology will continue to play a very critical role in resolving security challenges in Nigeria. We are making substantial progress in all the areas of conflict. The Council also decided that the unfortunate incident in Taraba State, in Ibi, a committee will be set up under the Defense Headquarters, set up by Defense Headquarters to critically investigate the circumstances that led to the unfortunate incidents in Ibi. And finally, we also want to assure Nigerians that the armed forces of Nigeria and security agencies, other security agencies, will continue to work to ensure the security of Nigerians and to also ensure that no individual or group of individuals undermines the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Nigeria.
Welcome back to Nigeria at 59. It's a special edition of Sunrise Daily. Well, let's get back to Alhaji Yakasai, who joins us from our studios in Abuja. Well, just before we went to that break, Chief Clark had suggested, one, we need a security conference, and that without restructuring, we can't really achieve perhaps the dreams of our founding fathers, if I could put it that way. But give us your impression. Do you share the same view that those two components could be part of the reasons why we may not seem to have achieved the dreams of our founding fathers?
Well, both my humble self and my brother, Chief Edwin Clark, have been familiar with the history of Nigeria. But for the benefit of the younger generation, I would like to briefly reiterate that when the British conquered the area now called Nigeria, they started by conquering the south and called it Southern Protectorate, and then moved on to the north and completed the conquest of the territory now that constitute Nigeria. So we were administered separately as northern and southern protectorates for almost 13 years. Then the British decided to join the two of us together in 1914, and we became Nigeria as a country, as a republic, not a republic. Now, thereafter, we were divided into three regions, north, west, and east. Then next we created 12-state structure. Now the three or four regions were created into 12 states. Now, after that, we were not satisfied. We clamored for more states. We were turned into 19 states. Thereafter, we became 21 states. Thereafter, we became 31 states. Until now, we became 36 states. All these are process of restructuring. What I have been hearing about this restructuring for a long time, but what I've been urging the protagonists of restructuring to do is to define, to give us a blueprint as to what will constitute the restructured Nigeria. How will Nigeria look like? I am a grandfather. E.K. Clark is a grandfather. The only difference between me and him is only 1 year. I'm his senior by 1 year. But we all know everything about Nigeria. Almost together, we are participants in all the development. So I think it would be a good idea if E.K. Clark, my good friend, will also persuade his colleagues who are advocating for restructuring Nigeria to come out with a blueprint whereby Nigerians will know what Nigeria will look like after it is restructured. You see, why I'm saying this is because when APC was formed, their main slogan was changed. And everybody was carried away by that slogan, change, 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 left, right, and center. Now, almost 5 years after the APC rule, nothing has changed. But our mistake was that when we decided to support APC on their change slogan, we did not ask them what will constitute the change that they are talking about. We kept quiet, we supported them, gave them almost everything they wanted. Now, after taking over power, we didn't see any change. So I want to be sure that when Nigeria is restructured, how it will look like. I know myself and E.K. Clark are on our way going. If we are lucky, we live up to the time when we'll be 100 years. Even if we'll be lucky to achieve that, we'll be almost gone, because even when I came to this studio, somebody had to help me to come up to this place. So by the time 10 years or 5, 7, 8 years are added to my present 9 to 4, it will be very difficult for me to enjoy life. The same thing with E.K. Clark and a number of friends. So let them work out a blueprint for me, because I have my children, I have grandchildren. At present, I have 19 children, I have about 40 grandchildren. So I'm looking for what will, if I go, my children will inherit by way of restructured Nigeria. So that
may bring in, just a moment, Alhaji Yakasai, if we may bring in Chief Clark now to respond to some of the issues you raised. Now, Chief Clark, Alhaji Yakasai is of the opinion that if I mean, if you're calling for restructuring, there needs to be some sort of blueprint. So the question is there a blueprint on one hand? And how would it look like, this restructuring that you're proposing?
Well, I think my friend Alaji Tanko Yakasai was a member, a delegate to the 2014 National Conference set up by the last administration. We attended that conference, which was composed of all sorts of personalities in Nigeria. The physically challenged, we had the dumb, the blind, the crippled, they all attended. All professionals were represented, market women and so forth. We were 492 delegates, and we made up of elders, the youngest in Nigeria, politician in Nigeria, the youngest lady from Maiduguri, and we recommended 600 recommendations. And if we followed that 2014 national conference, I do not think of any other blueprint, which my good friend is referring to. Let us implement the 2014 recommendations, which will bring Nigeria to a new country that we have all been looking for. Power will return to the states. At present, the states are appendages to the federal government. The power of the federal government is too much. Our is the most powerful president in the whole of this country, of this world, as if we have a military regime. Mr. President should look into this report, which made several series of recommendations. We are not even asking for a new constitution, even though the conference drafted one. A situation whereby you now have satellites, states are now satellites, they have no functions. At the end of the month, they come with cup in hand to get allocation. They go back, they can't pay their workers' salaries. Any government that cannot provide welfare for its community is not a state, it's not a country. So my good friend, you realize that we spent 4 months, about 4 months, to producing that paper. Even at that time, we provided for the Northeast. Today you have Northeast Development Commission. These were things we envisaged. For instance, I saw yesterday in the papers that the state spent over 1 billion naira on Hajj, both to Israel and to Saudi Arabia. In our conference, you remember, we discussed that government should not get itself involved in providing privileges for those who want to go and serve God in their own ways. Today, we have no money. Lots of our children are moving around, but today, if we have a restructured country, return to the 1963 Constitution, all will be well. All these challenges we have, I can assure you, the insecurity in this country will be cured by a return to true federalism, which is the restructuring of this country. So that is all. So nobody should run away. And I remember before the last election, the party ruling this country set up a committee under the governor of Kaduna State, El-Rufai, and they also recommended true federalism in this country. I don't know why Mr. President is shying away from it. Without restructuring, no meaningful development will take place in this country. I repeat, let us give, for instance, you have a governor of a state saying that he has no power, even though he's the chief security officer. Then you have governors leaving their homes, running away from their homes. And I believe that this security we have, I repeat, will be taken care of if we have a restructured country. And so, I do not know why the majority of my friends from the north are opposed to restructuring.
Okay, so let's ask Alhaji Yakasai now. So you've listened to Chief Clark. He says indeed there is a blueprint, and he made reference to the 2014 conference, which he says you were a part of. So now he says there's a blueprint, and he's of the opinion that you and, according to him, some other northern people are, averse to this restructuring. So how do you respond?
Well, yeah, it is true that both Chief Edwin Clark and myself were delegates to 2014 conference. But this is the first time I'm hearing that the recommendations of 2014 conference is the blueprint for a restructured Nigeria. As a party to the recommendation of that conference, and it will interest Nigerians to know that all the recommendations, more than 300 different recommendations, some of them were mere administrative, some of them were constitutional, some of them were legislative. None of them was termed as a blueprint for a restructured Nigeria. If this is the definition of restructured Nigeria, I'm for it, because I took part, all the decisions we took at that conference were by unanimous consent of the delegates. There was no division on the recommendations made to government in that conference. Unfortunately, I wished that President Jonathan, who instituted that conference, had cause to produce a white paper for the implementation of the recommendations of that conference. I know time was against him. He didn't do it. I even recently talked to the media about the need for the present government to consider the recommendations and see which one they are going to implement by way of administrative fiat and which one they are going to implement by way of organizing or sending bills to the National Assembly, and which way will require constitutional changes. I support the implementation of the recommendation, but I did not for a moment understand that the recommendations of the conference constituted the structure, the restructuring agenda that those who are advocating for restructuring Nigeria mean. If that is the case, I am for it. But I would remind my good friend that Chief Emeka Anyaku, the former Secretary General of the Commonwealth, has recommended going back to 1963 Constitution, which I personally also support. I know that some people met in Ibadan and accepted that we should go back to 1963 Constitution, but with 6 regions. 1963 Constitution has no 6 regions. So if we are going to back into 1963 Constitution, we should go back to 1963 Constitution and then follow the procedure for amending the Constitution provided in the 1963 Constitution to do whatever changes we wanted to do. But I am for it. I am 100% for it. But I'm speaking as a citizen of Nigeria. I do not consult any northerner. I'm not speaking on behalf of the North. In fact, even during the conference, delegates from the North, some of them, met, but they were not mandated by the North to speak on their behalf. They speak as delegates to the conference. So I think it is wrong to say that majority of the North is against the restructuring.
Alhaji, let's take, since apparently you both agree that the Constitutional Conference of 2014 is something that can be referenced as a pseudo-document for restructuring Nigeria and hopefully everyone else who is part of that might find a way to work that out. But then, Alhaji Tanko Yakasai, you mentioned something about the 1963 Constitution. It reminds me of a group of people that they call the Class of 1966. Had a significant number of Nigerians who are all in the military, about 15 of them, who are still very, very prominent in Nigerian politics today. And the average age of every one of them is about 26, 27. The president of Nigeria was at that time 24 years old. His chief of staff today was 28 years old at the time. In fact, General Sani Abacha, the General Sani Abacha was 23 years old at the time. And it just brings to mind the fact that up until now, some of these people are still in power. As a matter of fact, the president today is 76. Started being in this class of class of 66 at the age of 24, and he's in government today. So it brings to mind the question of how we transit from one generation to another. Do you think we are transiting? Do you think we are moving forward in terms of our governance, new thinking, and all of that? Let me ask you, first of all, Chief Edwin Clark, what do you think?
About what?
66, we just talked now.
What do I think about what?
We just talked about a group of men, 15 of them, whose average age is about 26. One of them is the president today, who at the age of 24 in 1966 was prominent in government, and up until now, he is still very, very prominent in government. His chief of staff, Abba Kyari, was 28 at the time, and is still very, very prominent in government now. So I'm asking, are we moving in terms of transiting from one generation to the other in order to be able to move Nigeria forward, or are we just staying where we were?
Well, thank you very much. Firstly, I'm very happy to hear that my very good friend, Alhaji Tanko Yakasai, now believes in the restructuring of this country. I think we are not moving. Whether some of them are still in government today, Nigeria has not moved because we are operating a very, very offside constitution, a constitution which does not reflect the name given to it, Federal Republic Constitution. We need a constitution whereby the states will have something to do if they are working. So imagine that before independence, the various premiers in the regions were able to develop their regions at their own pace. They made progress. But in 1966, we lost everything. The military took over. We fought a civil war. But today, we have not progressed because every Nigerian is not participating in the government of this country. What we have today is like a military regime. We are having a unitary form of government and not the federal system of government. As long as the way we are moving, today we have a president who has only one constituency in this country. I think many people in Nigeria do not believe that Mr. President is operating in the interest of all Nigerians. Appointments are not properly handled. Lopsided appointments have been made. Many Nigerians still believe today that there seems to be, the country is divided into those who regard themselves as superior and those who regard themselves as second-class citizens. We have to have a united Nigeria. And by implementing that, those recommendations, we'll have a true federalism. federal system of government. All states will work hard. Every state will go will tap its own resources. I think we must be very frank. I do not know what is worrying my good friends in the north that they are not wanting true federalism. Mr. President mentioned the other day, about some months ago, that true federalism is the answer to the problem of Nigeria. Let him implement the report. Otherwise, we are not moving anywhere. That is my submission.
Let me take this same question back to Alhaji Tanko Yakasai in our Abuja studio now. Well, we talked about this class of 66, 15 of them, some of them late, a few of them are still very much alive. And they overthrew the old order, developed a military intervention at the time, restructured the federation, fashioned the constitution, and even though they still prosecuted the war at the time, they meant some of them 23, 24, 26, 28. The oldest of them was 33 years old at the time, even though they were all in the military. Do you see the youth today being able to do the same thing, overthrow the old order, fashion a new constitution, restructure the federation, being that more than 50% of Nigeria's population is below age 35?
Well, in the first place, I think you should remember that those you mentioned that did something in 1966 and who are still operating, operated under military or semi-military regime, not under democracy. Therefore, they are not operating with the mandate of the people of this country. Talking of some of them are 70-something years old. Yes, they are. But today, if you take stock of the 36 state governors that we have, I doubt if you can have 6 of them who are up to 60 years of age. And mark you, anybody who is 70 or even 75 is qualified to be a son to my friend Edwin Clark or myself. Now, nobody of our age who is playing any role in the public affairs of Nigeria today, except as an onlooker. But it is the young generation that are operating the country. If they do well, the young generation are doing well. If they are not doing well, the young generation are not doing well. So don't blame, put the blame on anybody. It's their business. They have been, I think the last time people of our age played a role in ruling Nigeria was during the Second Republic, when Shagari was the president. Since then, was swept aside, and it is our children and our junior brothers who are operating, who are doing everything. And they do it under the military regime or semi-military regime. Like the present regime is a semi-military in my opinion. The Obasanjo 8 years was semi-military, because anybody who will swear to obey the Constitution and protect the law of the land, and who
We have to end it at that point. Alhaji Tanko Yakasai, OFR, former presidential advisor. And we also did have Chief Edwin Clark, an elder statesman. Thank you both for joining us today on a special edition of Nigeria's Independence Day. We will be back in a moment. Stay with us.